Police handcuffed a black woman in uniform. One phone call cost them their jobs. It was supposed to be a routine morning, just another drill weekend. Sergeant Aisha Coleman had driven that same stretch of road in Gehenna, Ohio, countless times before. Her uniform was crisp, her boots tightly laced, her mind focused. After 12 years of service in the Army Reserve, discipline was second nature. She pulled into a modest Sinclair gas station for fuel and a quick snack before heading to base. The cool morning air hadn't yet warmed, but the day was about to ignite in a way she never expected. Two police officers in a white Chevy Tahoe spotted her as she pumped gas, one young, eager, and impulsive, the other older, quiet, unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. Without warning, they approached, suspicion radiating from their posture, their tone sharp with an edge that went far beyond standard protocol. Aisha, calm but cautious, presented her military ID and driver's license without hesitation. "I'm Army Reserve," she said, her voice steady and professional. But it didn't matter. The younger officer barely glanced at her credentials before ordering her to turn around. Within seconds, she was handcuffed and shoved into the back of a police cruiser like a criminal, despite wearing a U.S. military uniform. To bystanders, the injustice was glaring. To Aisha, it was a familiar sting of being unseen, disrespected, reduced. But what the officers didn't know was that Aisha wasn't alone. With one phone call to Colonel Marcus Tate, everything was about to change. Her restraint wasn't submission, it was strategy. Soon, the entire country would see what happens when quiet strength meets reckless power. From the back seat of the cruiser, Aisha sat upright, her wrists aching but her mind in mission mode. She wasn't panicked. She was calculating. Every second, every breath was a decision. She knew how this would look, a black woman in military fatigues detained like a threat. The uniform on her chest didn't protect her, not here, not now. But it would speak for her in the right hands, and Colonel Marcus Tate, her commanding officer and godfather, was already listening. While the officers paced outside, trying to justify their mistake, Aisha kept the call open, letting the audio speak for itself. Her silence on the line said more than 1,000 protests ever could. Outside the cruiser, the energy shifted. More onlookers gathered, phones pointed in every direction. The authority that once empowered the officers now began to isolate them. The younger one paced nervously, trying to act unfazed, but his face betrayed him. The older one stood rigid, staring at his shoes. They had crossed a line, and Aisha had given them all the rope they needed to hang their reputations. Meanwhile, Marcus was in motion. In less than 10 minutes, calls were flying dispatch, military command, city officials. Aisha wasn't just any reservist. She had years of commendations, a spotless service record, and the unwavering respect of her peers. Now, with a growing digital trail documenting the incident, her truth had traction. But this wasn't about going viral or making headlines. It was about respect earned, not given. Aisha didn't speak to prove her worth. Her presence did that already. What she wanted was accountability, not just for herself, but for those who'd come after her, who'd wear the same uniform, drive the same road, and pray they'd be treated as more than a threat. As Colonel Tate closed in, so did justice. Colonel Marcus Tate arrived at the gas station not with flashing lights or a raised voice, but with the weight of authority earned over decades of military service. As he stepped out of his car, the energy shifted again. Those who had dismissed Aisha now looked unsure, sensing this wasn't just a misstep, but a violation that echoed far beyond this parking lot. Marcus's presence wasn't about theatrics, it was confirmation that Aisha wasn't alone. He scanned the scene, taking mental inventory of everyone and everything, then met her eyes. No words passed between them in that moment, none were needed. Aisha's composure had done more damage than any confrontation ever could. Inside the Sinclair station, staff whispered while a woman in scrubs replayed her video to another bystander. In a nearby news van, the clip had already begun broadcasting statewide. Reporters spoke in hurried tones, scrambling to identify Aisha, only to learn she wasn't just another uniform. She was a career soldier, decorated and disciplined, respected and resilient. The ripple effect had begun. At the precinct, conversations turned quiet and clipped. At the city office, emails buzzed with concern. Aisha hadn't demanded justice, but she had created the conditions that made ignoring her impossible. As the wheels of accountability began to turn, it became clear this wasn't an isolated error, it was part of a pattern. Aisha, by standing tall in silence, had become the undeniable catalyst for change. Back at the station, the ripple Aisha set in motion turned into a current too strong to contain. Officers Bryant and Caldwell were summoned to a closed-door administrative hearing not with sirens, but with printed reports, timestamps, and footage that didn't lie. They sat separately, flanked by HR representatives and an internal affairs officer. No one raised their voice. There was no drama, just a calm unraveling of their actions, line by line. The body cam footage had already circulated through legal and military channels. What sealed their fate, however, wasn't just the moment they cuffed Aisha, it was the careless muttering caught after the mic was off, a chuckle, a dismissive shrug, and a cruel offhand remark about fake vets. Words spoken with the arrogance of those who believed no one was watching. But people were watching now. As news of their pending termination broke, the city's press office scrambled to draft a response. It wasn't enough. Veteran groups organized candlelight vigils. Service members from every branch posted tributes online, not just for Aisha but for what her silence had exposed, a system that trusted its biases more than its evidence. At the same time, students in a high school civics class watched the footage and debated what accountability really meant. Was it enough to lose a badge, or was the real punishment the public recognition of failure? Aisha remained quiet. She didn't need to speak. Her stillness had already echoed louder than outrage. The world around her was beginning to shift. Officers trained differently, policies revised, conversations unspoken now forced into the open. At the center of it all, Aisha stood not as a victim, but as a mirror held up to a system that had looked away for too long. In the days that followed, Aisha returned to her quiet routines not because things had returned to normal, but because normal was something she now viewed with skepticism. Every morning, she laced her boots with a little more intention. The stares she received while running errands hadn't faded, they had simply changed flavor. Some looked at her with admiration, others with discomfort, as if her presence reminded them of something they wished to forget. At her local grocery store, the cashier who once barely acknowledged her now offered a hesitant smile. Aisha returned it but didn't linger. She had no interest in becoming a public monument to a private humiliation. Then one afternoon, a small envelope arrived at her door. No return address. Inside was a folded note on lined paper, the handwriting messy, hurried. I saw the video. I didn't say anything, but I was there. I should have. I'm sorry. No name, just that. It hit Aisha harder than the formal apologies from the police chief, the city council, or even the mayor's office, because this one was real, honest, vulnerable. Later that week, a local high school invited her to speak to their ROTC cadets. She declined the podium and instead sat in a circle with them, eye level, speaking not about what happened but about what it meant. Sometimes, she said, you don't get to choose the moment you stand for something. It chooses you. And when it does, you better know who you are before the world tries to tell you who you're not. There were no applause breaks, no media camera, just silence, thoughtful silence, the kind that sticks, the kind that might one day prevent another pair of cuffs from closing on someone who already gave everything to serve. 2 weeks after the incident, the city announced a new initiative, mandatory bias training for all officers interacting with military personnel and a revised protocol requiring documented verification before any detention. Aisha read the headlines in silence. She wasn't looking for policy wins or to be credited as the catalyst, but there was something satisfying in knowing change was no longer just talk, it was being written into manuals. Still, her own world hadn't settled. The uniform that once made her feel grounded now felt like armor. She wore it differently, straighter, firmer, as if daring anyone to doubt it again. At Sunday drill, her fellow reservists greeted her with quiet respect, no speeches, no questions, just a shift in posture when she walked in. But even in that solidarity, Aisha sensed a ripple of unease, not about her, but about what she represented now. Proof that service didn't always shield you from suspicion. During a break, one of the younger recruits approached. "Sergeant Coleman," he said softly, "do you think it'll ever stop people seeing us as threats before they see the uniform?" Aisha looked at him, then down at her own boots, dusted with gravel from morning drills. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "But I know we can't afford to stop showing up." That night, she sat alone in her apartment, flipping through old photos, training camps, deployments, holidays missed. Every image told a story of discipline, sacrifice, and pride, yet none captured the weight of being judged before being heard. She closed the album and looked at her reflection in the darkened window. This fight, Wyatt, relentless, wasn't about being a soldier anymore. It was about claiming humanity in spaces that tried to take it. And she wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. In the end, this story isn't just about a mistaken arrest, a uniform, or a viral video. It's about something deeper, something that touches every generation that has ever had to prove their worth just to be believed. Sergeant Aisha Coleman stood firm, not because she wanted to make headlines, but because she refused to let quiet injustice pass unchecked. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand the spotlight. She simply stood her ground, trusted her values, and made one phone call that changed everything. In that stillness, in her dignity under pressure, she reminded the world of something it too often forgets. Respect is not a privilege granted by authority, it's a right earned by service, character, and truth. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was control. Her calm wasn't compliance, it was wisdom. She made them see what they tried to ignore. For those of us who've lived long enough to witness injustice repeat itself, Aisha's story gives us more than outragite, gives us hope that quiet courage still exists, that real change can start with one calm voice saying, "This is wrong." And that sometimes, the most powerful protest doesn't come from shouting, but from standing still and letting the truth speak louder than any badge. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect even for a moment, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave us a comment, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the bell for more powerful, true stories that prove dignity, when tested, always rises.